I'm 74 now, and I didn't expect to be learning new lessons at this age. I thought by now most things would feel settled, or at least familiar enough not to surprise me. But last year, I did something that quietly rearranged parts of me I thought were already done shifting. The idea didn't arrive dramatically. It came in small comments from people who meant well. Casual remarks about companionship, about not being alone forever. I nodded politely when they spoke, as if they were describing someone else's life, not mine. Not the routines I had carefully shaped. I had been alone for a long time. Long enough that solitude felt less like a problem and more like a rhythm. My days had a certain predictability that I once found dull, but later learned to trust. Nothing demanded too much of me anymore, and that felt earned. When I finally agreed to try dating again, it wasn't excitement that pushed me. It was curiosity mixed with a soft pressure, the sense that maybe I was missing something I was supposed to want. I told myself it was harmless, just an experiment. I didn't tell anyone how uneasy I felt, clicking through profiles late at night, sitting in my quiet living room. The house felt smaller then, as if it was watching me do something unfamiliar. I remember thinking how strange it was to invite new expectations into a life that had grown used to none. The first man I met was kind enough, polite in the way people are when they've learned the rules, but not the feeling behind them. We sat across from each other in a small cafe, exchanging summaries of our lives as if we were reading from carefully edited versions. I noticed how often we both paused, as if searching for something genuine to say without knowing where to find it. Dating at this age is not about discovery. Not really. It's about comparison. You listen, and without meaning to, you measure their story against your own. What they lost, what they kept, what they never recovered. Every conversation felt like walking through rooms already furnished by the past. I told myself I was open, that I was curious, that I hadn't closed the door on connection. But inside, I was guarding something fragile. I didn't want to rearrange my life again only to decorate the edges. I wanted company without disruption, closeness without consequence. Soon, there were more dates, more voices, more attempts at chemistry. Some were lonely in loud ways, others in quieter, heavier ones. I learned how quickly people reveal their wounds when they believe time is running out. And I learned how quickly I absorbed those stories without realizing the cost. What I didn't admit then was how much effort it took just to show up. Choosing clothes, preparing answers, rehearsing enthusiasm. Each meeting left me slightly more tired, slightly less sure why I had started. Still, I continued, telling myself stopping would mean admitting something I wasn't ready to name. What surprised me wasn't disappointment. I had expected that. What I didn't expect was how invisible I began to feel while sitting right across from someone. Conversations drifted toward their needs, their routines, their expectations of what companionship should look like now. I listened more than I spoke, slipping into a role I thought I had already outgrown. There was a quiet pressure in all of it, an unspoken urgency that hung in the air. People our age don't talk about the future gently. They talk about it practically, almost transactionally. Who will move? Who will adjust? Whose life is more flexible? I realized how easily my carefully built solitude could be treated as empty space. After each date, I returned home with a strange restlessness. My house, once calm and familiar, felt unsettled. I caught myself replaying conversations, wondering if I had said too much or too little, if I had been warm enough without being misleading. The silence that followed felt heavier than the one I had known before. I began to notice small changes in myself. I delayed my routines, waited for messages that didn't matter, adjusted my evenings around other people's availability. None of it was dramatic, but it was persistent. piece by piece, my days stopped feeling like they belonged entirely to me. What hurt most was realizing that I had started performing a version of myself that fit better into someone else's expectations. Softer, more agreeable, less certain. It wasn't that anyone asked me to be smaller. It was that I offered it, almost automatically, without questioning why. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to understand what was wrong. Nothing terrible had happened. No betrayal, no sharp ending, no single moment I could point to and justify my unease. That made it harder to trust what I was feeling, harder to name the discomfort without sounding ungrateful. One evening, sitting alone after another polite goodbye, I realized how familiar that feeling was. I had felt it before, decades earlier, in relationships where I stayed longer than I should have because leaving felt like failure. The setting was different now, the stakes quieter, but the pattern was the same. I saw then that dating again wasn't reopening my heart, it was reopening old habits. The habit of accommodating, of reshaping my life to make room for someone else's uncertainty. I had mistaken effort for connection and patience for compatibility. What unsettled me most was how easily I had doubted my own contentment. Years of calm, self-knowledge and hard-won peace had been brushed aside by the idea that wanting nothing more was somehow incomplete. I wondered when I had learned to distrust a life that no longer needed proof. That night, I didn't feel lonely. I felt protective. Protective of the quiet I had built, of the woman I had become when no one was watching. For the first time since starting, I allowed myself to question whether this path was adding anything at all. I stopped dating without making an announcement, without explaining myself to anyone. Conversations faded, routines slowly returned to their old shape. There was no relief exactly, just a gradual sense of things settling back into place, like furniture being returned to familiar corners. I don't regret the people I met. They were honest in their own ways, carrying lives as full and complicated as mine. What I regret is how quickly I assumed that wanting nothing more meant I was avoiding something, instead of choosing it. At this age, time feels different. It doesn't stretch forward the way it once did. It gathers behind you. And I realized I don't want to spend what's left negotiating space in my own life or explaining why my quiet matters. Sometimes I wonder if I misunderstood what it meant to be open. Maybe openness isn't about inviting more in. Maybe it's about noticing when something disturbs a balance you worked hard to create, and listening to that discomfort without rushing to fix it. I'm 74 now, and I don't feel wiser for having tried again, just clearer. Clearer about what costs me peace, and how easily that cost can be overlooked when something sounds like it should be good. If this story feels familiar, maybe it's because some choices don't look like mistakes until you're already living inside them.